Good morning. This is Doug Howard with Growth Team Strategies. I'm here with Kathi Fleck, one of our senior consultants, with another episode of Selling the Dream, our podcast for business owners that one day want to potentially sell or transfer their business. So, Kathi, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Of course, you're doing great. You're about to be coming up north, so
I know. On the
chance to
road
see you in
tomorrow.
person. That's right. We never get to see you in person that
Mhm.
often, so excited about that. So, it's funny. We're doing a lot of events right now. We're talking to a lot of folks, and this issue of succession planning keeps bubbling up to the surface, right? There are some folks that really are in the mode, and then there's so many others that just kind of know what's out there, and then every now and then something reminds them, or they hear something, or they start thinking about what's going to transpire, and they start to get more active. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of conversation about, well, I have an idea of what I want to do. Like I know, like, one of my children or some subset of my kids want to take it over, or I've got a leadership team and they might want to take it over, or maybe we could do something like an ESOP. But I think sometimes the idea that I've got a general idea kind of almost keeps people from saying, but I still need to go down the path, just like I would if I was literally preparing this thing to go to market.
Mhm.
And I know you've met a bunch of those folks. Your business sold on the open market, mine did too. Although I had a successor at one point, that just didn't really pan out because he moved away. But you've seen a number of people, right, that kind of have taken different approaches.
Mhm.
So I think it might be helpful just to kind of talk about a couple of those approaches. And then I know some of our upcoming guests are going to be folks that have gone through some of these different paths, because just knowing that there's somebody that's going to take it over is just, it's helpful, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle.
Right. Yeah, I think from visiting with some of my peers, there's this concept. Of course, as entrepreneurs, our business is kind of our baby. We put so much of our effort and time and love into it that we still don't want to just let it go.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people want to pass it off to somebody that they know. So it's either a family member or an employee or a group of employees. And that seems to be a consensus for a lot of business owners. They just want to know that it's in good hands.
Yeah.
So part of it is who is the best option? Can you pass it on to one of your children? Do your children even want it? Do they have the skill set for it? So there's that component.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been working with great company, great family, where they had a good number of kids. Some of them were in the business, some of them weren't. One of the
Mhm.
in-laws had been in the business for a long period of time, and you kind of get to that point, and so we know generally the plan is we want to have some form of transition. But when you start to get down to the nuts and bolts and who's involved and not, and things like that, I'm finding more and more you almost have to approach it with some of the same questions that we start looking at when we don't know who the successor is, right? Because there's so
Yeah.
many different configurations that this could take.
And who's going to be ready? When are they going to be ready? Do they want it? Do they have the maturity and the skill set to really be able to handle it? Or is it going to pull the owner right back into the business when they're really wanting to be done?
Yeah. And I think that's much more prone to happen too with family members, right? It's like, well,
Mhm.
we can move the date, we can keep pushing things out. I know sometimes the closer we get, it seems like, we got so much going on. Now's not the time to transition, or, and so now, Kathi, do you know anybody that, not who they are, but just have you seen the situation where someone has transitioned their business to their leadership team, not a family member, but,
Mhm.
other folks that they've worked with over a period of time?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of one, but there's businesses that are very successful. They're doing extremely well. They have a very mature leadership team who are handling more and more of the business responsibilities. And in some cases, that is a really good transition. Maybe the owner stays on for a while or backs out slowly, or maybe they want to sell part of the business to this leadership team and then they're not ready to retire yet, but they know that that's something down the road. So I think that, considering an ESOP, that is probably a really good option, but once a business owner starts talking to some experts, they can better determine what is the best approach. And when I sold my business, I mean, I knew it was a small boutique type business, so I knew I didn't really have a team or an individual to sell it to. And so there really wasn't that option. I didn't have children I didn't have children, so that wasn't an option. So to me, I knew I needed to go outside the business.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so when you say ESOP, Kathy, what's your understanding of that? I mean, just in general terms, because I hear that term a lot, right? People are like, well, we're gonna have an ESOP because there's a financial side to it, there's a transaction side, then there's the operation side too, though, that still has to continue.
I can't say I'm really well versed in it. And I was talking to my broker who handled an ESOP for one of my referrals to her. And
Uh-huh.
I asked her how that really worked. And she said there are so many different variables that are part of it. So um, probably that would be a good conversation for, the person that I worked with to talk about ESOP as an option. But I don't really know all the depths of it. It's just when somebody really wants to sell to the family, or I'm sorry, to the leadership team, and they want to keep the employees involved, they could sell all of it. They could sell it over a period of time. They could sell shares of it. It just really depends upon what the business is like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it certainly needs more depth than what I have to offer.
Yeah, no, I think that, but I think just the idea, sometimes people feel like, well, if I turn it over to the employees, I've got to work out the mechanics of that. There are some financial aspects to it. One of the things that I often find, though, is people need to realize that even within an ESOP or any structure you create, right, someone's got to run the thing.
Right, right.
And I think that's one of the hardest challenges is to say, well, even with a leadership team, even if you have 2 or 3 people buy it out, or sometimes people will designate and say, well, I'm going to sell it to, I have a 3-person leadership team and they'll all work together. And, but there's a different dynamic there in terms of, do they really want to be business partners? Do they all have tolerance for even being a business owner? And so I think as we start going down these paths, it's important for people to realize starting to get an understanding of which of those options might make more sense for you, or at least things you need to explore, take some time, right?
Hmm.
But then in all of that, no matter which path you choose, whether you sell it to a kid or a leadership team or an ESOP or even to a third party completely, there are certain things about how the company's going to function. And do we have, someone in a position able to run it,
Right.
right? That becomes really important. Because, even when you put a couple of members of the leadership team, to me, it's always hard to know how much of that leadership team is still reliant on the business owner.
Right. I also think they are employees, and oftentimes employees don't think like an owner. And do they really have that long term commitment to be an owner? And so I'm thinking of some situations where the plan is to sell to employees, and then the employee's life changes for whatever reason. Maybe it's health, maybe it's family, maybe it's um, a spouse, whatever reason, and they are still an employee, not really able or willing to then become a business owner and take on that responsibility. So it's a big decision.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so too. And so I think, as we're talking to some folks that become, resources for that, it's just important for people to really give some thought to. Because what I find is when people get sort of a general idea and it's like, well, it's going to go to my leadership team or it's going to go to my kids, it allows them to push off things that they shouldn't be pushing off.
Right, right. They should figure that out sooner than later because it still takes time to transition that. Let's say they're selling it to family members or to a leadership team. It still takes time. And are they really the right ones or able to do it? Because if you're planning on something 2, 3, 5 years down the road, and the people who are the ones you're thinking of selling it to aren't even there anymore or willing to buy it, or something happens to them,
Yeah.
then everything just changes upside down and then you've got to start over.
Well, no, I agree. So, I think when people start looking at it too, I think there's a whole element of what do you do? And I don't know if you know people that have had this situation, but sometimes I'll have people say like, well, I'm going to offer it to my leadership team or maybe to some of the kids, and they have an idea of who would be the right ones to be involved, but maybe somebody else has an interest in it,
Yeah.
right? Because, as soon as you go from being a key employee and think you may be part of the succession, and then you find out maybe you're not, right?
Hmm.
Then we run the challenge of, are you even going to stay as an employee?
Right, right.
You know? And I also find out, some relationships are really easier to navigate. Like sometimes we have siblings that work reasonably well together, but it's because mom or dad or both are still directing the traffic.
Hmm.
Right? You take
Hmm.
them out of the mix, and now all of a sudden we have a different dynamic. You know, that can really change things too. And I find that sometimes parents aren't the best judge of how that ought to go and who ought to do what and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
also a real sense, I think, sometimes that if I'm the oldest son or daughter, that somehow I'm, in line for something better than my other siblings in terms of the ownership of the business. And sometimes that bears itself out because, maybe they've been involved in the business for a long time. Other times, not so much, right?
Mm.
And so it is kind of a funky dynamic where it's like, well, yeah, but the youngest of the three really ought to be the one that's the president of the company, or really ought to be you know,
I think it's hard for the family to really determine that. Probably an outside advisor is better suited to determine that, because who really knows what part they play? And you're right. The family dynamics get very sticky at times.
I tell them all the time. It's like unless you're in the royal family, being
That's what you do.
being the oldest and first in line doesn't have quite as much benefit. But I think in that we've seen some companies do a really, really good job, though, and this is a good thing for anybody to do, whether you're going to navigate transitioning ownership to family members or to a leadership team, or even a leadership team that ends up in some sort of an ESOP, is to get very clear on the different positions in the company and what that org chart's going to look like when the owner's not there,
Hmm.
right? And then to be very clear on what are the requirements for a particular position to be eligible for a particular position, right? Am I going to become the president of the company or the head of marketing or whatever just because I'm here or just because I have that interest? Or is there a set of circumstances that I need to meet, a set of criteria, right? So one of the things we've seen some people do a good job of is to identify that and say, to even be eligible, right, to be our CFO or to be the head of the company or whatever, here's some things that you would need to know. Here's some training you would need to get. And then it kind of puts the onus on the people in the company, the kids or the leadership team members or whatever, to take responsibility for some of their own development, right?
Right, right.
You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, you either went out and got some training in this area, or you learned how to do this, or you held several different positions, or you didn't. But when we get there, if you haven't done the things that you needed to do, that's going to make potentially stand in the way of you just taking that role.
I think you have to earn it. I've always said to people, and understood this myself, that you really have to be doing the work before you get that title and you have that responsibility. I think people really have a tendency to grow into something, whether it's the ownership of the business or part of it, or even just as an employee. They really are doing the work before they have that title.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's exciting, Kathi. I think over the next, 8 or 10 podcasts that we're going to have, we're going to be filtering in outside resources that have a perspective on this, and
Hmm.
also business owners that have taken some of these different paths, and some of what they did successfully, and probably more importantly, some of the things that looking back they maybe wish they had done,
Yeah.
so we can get down that path. But the
Mhm.
thing I would say, and I know we talk about this all the time, but it is so incredibly important for people to start answering the questions they can answer or start figuring out the things they can figure out, because it's so easy to sort of leave a lot of options on the table and kind of push things down the road. And then all of a sudden you get to a certain point and it's like, well, now I want to be out in 6 months or a year or whatever. And I don't have a leader designated and
Mhm.
properly trained, or we really haven't vetted who's qualified to take these positions that I'm going to be stepping out of, or any of those things that we know need to happen for this kinds of transitions to go smoothly.
Mhm. Yeah,
right?
I think it is really crucial to plan much further ahead than you want to do, than you want to exit.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it really starts with that org chart. I think if the first place people can start is, what is the org chart for this company at the time I think I'm going to transit, right? The positions I'll be out of, how big will the company be? Sometimes if it's 3 to 5 years from now, there may be additional positions we don't even have yet.
Right.
Who on the org chart may retire themselves in that period of time,
Yeah.
right? But the clearer we get with that and say, okay, there needs to be a structure, whatever it happens to be, I think people can start some of those things like
Mhm.
the career paths and the things that are going to qualify someone to be in those positions, and really start to have some conversations that are important to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the best place for you. I mean, I've not really had kids in my business, but if I did, and one of them was thinking they were designated for something that I really didn't think they were suited for, I mean, in fairness to them and wanting them to have a good landing, I'd want to have that conversation sooner rather than later,
True. Yes.
you
Yeah.
know?
And it may be difficult to swallow for some people, but it's better to have that up front than have them thinking something down the road, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Just creates a lot of trauma for everybody.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate it. I know you're doing a lot of the outreach to folks to get us lined up with some really awesome guests, people that have been in these situations, and yeah, we'll look forward to their insights and asking the right questions and seeing if we can help people, kind of just prepare better, right?
Yeah,
So
I think that's a great idea. And it's always good to hear different perspectives.
yes, because even though you and I are entertaining to each other, whether I was just out in Hollywood a couple of weeks ago, and even though I thought I would be well received and discovered, I came and went and without any contracts or special offers or anything like that. So,
Poor thing. I feel so bad for you.
no, me too. I totally agree. I mean, I feel like, can you imagine about like a late night talk show about selling your business? I mean, like, you know, for all the people that can't sleep at night, if
You
you
already
can't,
had one of those
yeah,
recently.
what's that?
You already had one of those Johnny Carson moments recently.
I did. I thought that was going to be my big break, my big audition, and it turned out to be just mediocre. So, anyhow, we'll do it the hard way. We'll get real guests, have some real conversations. In the process, I fully expect to be discovered, but I'm willing to bide my time because you
Good.
always tell me I'm impatient, and I still have time to get discovered. So. All right. Well, thanks for your insights. I look forward to the conversations we're going to have with some other folks. And we'll be back with Selling the Dream in another week and look forward to talking then.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast starring Doug, Howard, and Kathi Fleck. Both Doug and Kathi have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.